The digital clock on the car dashboard ticked 22:47. Miguel Ramirez adjusted his glasses on his nose and ran a hand over his tired face. The day had been long, too long. As an investigative journalist, he was used to pressure, veiled threats, and attempts at intimidation, but his latest report, an expose on corruption and racism within the Monterrey police, seemed to have crossed an invisible line. He knew he was treading on dangerous ground, but he had no choice. His voice was one of the few willing to speak about what many preferred to ignore. Being a black man in Mexico was already a daily challenge, but being a black journalist exposing racist police officers? This was practically an invitation for trouble. Traffic was starting to thin out at that time, and Miguel took a detour along a less busy avenue to get home faster. On the radio, an old bolero played, and for a moment, he allowed himself to relax. It was then that red and blue lights flashed behind him. His body immediately stiffened. He looked in the rearview mirror. A police car. Shit! Instinctively, his heart quickened. Not because I had done anything wrong, but because I already knew what was coming next. I had experienced this scene before. I had seen friends go through this. I had interviewed victims of violent attacks that started exactly like this. Miguel pulled the car over to the side of the road and turned off the engine. He took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. But when the police officers got out of the vehicle and began to approach, he already knew that this would not be a common approach. The first police officer to approach was a man in about 40 years old, fair skin, small eyes, and a thick mustache that seemed to wrinkle along with his suspicious expression. His name was embroidered on the uniform, Officer Mendez. The second, a little younger, had a restless look and seemed to follow the other's lead. Mendez hit twice with the baton on the side of Miguel's door. License and vehicle documents. The dry and authoritarian tone left no room for negotiation. Miguel maintained his composure, moving slowly as he retrieved the documents from the glove compartment. But before he could hand them over came the inevitable question. "Are you in a hurry, brunette?" The way the word Moreno was said made Miguel's stomach turn. It wasn't a casual comment. It wasn't curiosity. It was a test. He knew that trap. If he reacted, he would be considered aggressive. If he stayed silent, he would give them the feeling of power they wanted. "I'm just going home," he replied calmly, handing over the documents. The second officer took the papers and analyzed them, but Mendez did not back down. He leaned a little closer to the window, letting Miguel feel his hot breath, full of cheap coffee. "You're not from here, right?" Miguel felt the muscles in his neck tense. It was always the same question, the subtle way of saying, "You don't belong here." "I was born here. I lived abroad for a while, but I came back." The crooked smile that formed on Mendez's lips made Miguel's blood run cold. It was already decided. He wasn't going to get out of there without being humiliated. "Get out of the car, now!" And that's when Miguel realized this wasn't a common approach, that it was a hunt. Miguel kept his hands steady on the steering wheel. His body wanted to react, but his mind knew that every movement could be used against him. He took a deep breath, mentally counting to 3 before speaking. "May I know the reason, officer?" Mendez leaned in further, his narrow eyes shining with something between contempt and fun. "The reason?" he repeated, feigning surprise. "The reason is that I ordered it." The second officer, the youngest, looked uncomfortable. He adjusted his posture and cleared his throat, avoiding looking directly at Miguel. "Officer, maybe it's best to just check the documents and—" Mendez raised his hand, cutting off his partner's speech. The look she gave him was as sharp as a blade. "I told him to get out of the car, or are you going to start questioning me too?" The younger officer lowered his head, not responding. Miguel knew he had no choice. If he didn't comply, Mendez could say he was resisting. If he argued, he could be dragged out of the car. And if that happened, well, he already knew how these stories usually ended. Slowly, he unlocked the door and left. The night was hot and humid, but a chill ran down his spine. "Pull over, hands on the hood." Mendez knocked lightly on the car. The humiliation came first. Miguel obeyed. He felt the cold metal beneath his palms as Mendez searched him in an exaggeratedly aggressive manner. The rings weren't just a search for weapons, they were a warning. "It's clean," said the second policeman, his voice low. But Mendez wasn't satisfied. He started walking around Miguel's car, lightly kicking the tires as if looking for an excuse. "What do we have here, huh?" he murmured, looking through the glass. "Too good a car for you, right?" Miguel closed his eyes for a moment, trying to contain his anger. "This car is mine." "Of course it is," Mendez mocked. "Documentation stolen or purchased?" That was a punch in the gut. Anger bubbled inside Miguel. It wasn't about the car. It was never about the car. It was about him. On the fact that a black man was driving a vehicle that, in Mendez's mind, should not have been in his hands. Miguel straightened his posture, slowly moving away from the car. He had been in situations like this before. He knew that if he let his anger show, he would give the officer exactly what he wanted, a reason to act violently. "I'm a journalist. If you want, you can call the center and check my name." Mendez's smile disappeared instantly. Journalist. The air became denser. For the first time that night, Mendez seemed to hesitate. Miguel noticed. It took him by surprise. "Ah, so that's why you're so sure of yourself, right?" The police officer's tone was harsher. He didn't like the information. The second officer moved restlessly to the side. Miguel saw uncertainty grows on his face. But before anyone could speak, a new police car approached. The blue and red lights flashed again, illuminating the wet asphalt. Mendez stood still for a second. The second officer took a step back, as if he already knew something was about to happen. Miguel frowned. This was the moment when things could take an even more dangerous turn, or change completely. "Officer Mendez, what's going on here?" A firm voice echoed from the newly arrived patrol car, and then the real turnaround began. The door of the newly arrived vehicle opened and a woman in uniform came down. She had dark hair tied into a tight bun and a sharp gaze, which soon fixed on Mendez. His stance was firm but not aggressive. "Officer Mendez, I need to understand. What's going on here?" Mendez pursed his lips, clearly uncomfortable. "Just a routine approach, Lieutenant Ortega." The subject was driving suspiciously. Miguel observed everything in silence, but his heart hammered in his chest. "Lieutenant?" She was superior to Mendez. Ortega looked back at Miguel, analyzing him for a moment. Then he turned to the second officer, who hesitated before speaking. "You are a journalist." He identified himself. Ortega frowned and looked directly at Miguel. "And truth?" Miguel took a deep breath. He knew that moment would define how everything would end. "Yes, I'm an investigative journalist. My name is Miguel Ramirez. I work for El Diario." There was a heavy silence. Lieutenant Ortega wasn't stupid. She had heard that name before. The name of the man who was investigating corruption within the police itself. Her eyes returned to Mendez, who now he seemed more restless than ever. "And what was the traffic violation exactly?" Mendez cleared his throat. "He was driving suspiciously." "Suspicion," Ortega repeated, crossing his arms. "And this criterion was based on what?" Mendez avoided his gaze. The nervousness was evident. "He seemed to be in a hurry." The lieutenant glanced at Miguel. "Were you overspeeding?" "No." Ortega sighed, clearly frustrated. It was then that the tables turned. "Officer Mendez," Ortega said, his voice taking on a cold tone, "this approach seems motivated by racial profiling." Mendez hardened his face. "This is ridiculous." I was just doing my job. The lieutenant was unfazed. Your work does not include approaches without legitimate reason. She turned to the second policeman. Do you confirm that was there no apparent infringement? The young man hesitated. Miguel saw the internal battle in his eyes. If he confirmed, he would be going against his partner. But if I lied? He took a deep breath and nodded. Yes, ma'am. There was no apparent infringement. Mendez's eyes widened. Are you kidding me? Ortega straightened his posture. Officer, Mendez, hand over your gun and badge. You are being suspended for inappropriate conduct, pending the completion of an internal investigation. Mendez's face turned blood red. You can't. I can, and I am doing it. Silence fell like a bomb. Miguel observed everything, feeling something he rarely felt in front of the police. Justice. Ortega turned to him. Mr. Ramirez, I'm sorry for this approach. We are dealing with cases like this within the corporation. I hope you understand that we are not all like that. Miguel did not respond immediately. He still didn't know what to believe, but for the first time saw cracks in the system. Maybe something was changing. He took a deep breath, grabbed his documents, and returned to the car. The night was still warm, but now the air felt a little lighter. Miguel drove slowly, trying to process everything that had just happened. Anger still bubbled inside him, but now it was mixed with something unexpected. Hope. That was the first time I had seen a police officer held accountable at the exact moment he committed an abuse. But he knew that wasn't enough. When he got home, he threw the keys on the table and threw himself on the couch, staring at the ceiling. What would he do with it? He could simply go on with his life, thankful for the luck of having escaped unharmed. But that wasn't how it worked. That approach was not an isolated event. He knew that dozens of other people went through this every day without the presence of a Lieutenant Ortega to intervene. It was not enough for a corrupt police officer to be suspended. He needed to show the system behind it. He got up and went to his makeshift office in the corner of the room. He opened his laptop and started writing. The title came first: Racism. Inside the Monterey Police. The night I was stopped for being black. With every word I typed, I relived the moment. The humiliation, Mendez's look, fear disguised as calm. But he also remembered the second officer's hesitant look and Lieutenant Ortega's firmness. There was something there. Something beyond the obvious. The police were not a single entity. It was made up of individuals, and some of them they wanted to change. During the following days, Miguel not only wrote his article, but went after other victims. He interviewed Black and Indigenous drivers, collected reports, and revisited his previous research. When he finally published the article, the impact was immediate. Social media exploded with comments. Other journalists began sharing the story. Civil rights organizations got in touch. Pressure on the police department increased. And then, the unexpected happened. That Friday, as he was leaving the newspaper building, he found Lieutenant Ortega waiting for him. "We can talk?" Miguel crossed his arms, studying her for a moment. "Do you want to convince me that your corporation is changing?" She didn't smile. His look was serious, determined. "I want to change my corporation. I need your help for this." For a moment, Miguel was speechless. He had spent his life distrusting the police. How could I now be part of a solution? But when he looked at Ortega, he saw something different, an opportunity. Maybe it was time to do more than just report it. Maybe it was time to act. "Okay," he said, after a long silence. "Let's talk." The chat with Lieutenant Ortega took place in a discreet cafe in the city center. Miguel arrived, without knowing exactly what to expect, but he felt that this meeting could be a game changer. "You have to understand, Ramirez," began Ortega, stirring the coffee without looking at him directly. "I'm not naive. I know the police have A serious problem. Racism, corruption, abuse of power. It is not an isolated case. Miguel kept his arms crossed, listening to her carefully. And yet, you are part of it. She finally looked up. I am part because I want to change this from the inside. But alone, I'm not enough. Miguel let out a dry laugh. And why me? Because your report did something I never managed to do. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. She put fear into them. Miguel was silent. After your article came out, I received direct orders not to create problems with the Mendez case. Ortega made air quotes. They want everything to be quiet, but I won't let that happen. Michael studied her for a moment. So, what's your plan? Ortega took a deep breath before speaking. I want to open an internal investigation into racist approaches within the department, but for that, I need proof. Miguel's heart beat faster. Do you want me to investigate? Like you? She nodded. I want you to help me expose the patterns, the data, the repeat officers. I want you to do what you do best. Show the truth. It was an insane proposal. Miguel never imagined that one day he would work directly with someone from the police. But what if it was the chance he was waiting for? The chance to really change something? He sat back in his chair, watching. Ortega, if I do this, I need reassurance. I need access. And I need to know that you won't leave me hanging. Ortega didn't hesitate. If you get into this with me, I won't back down. Miguel took a deep breath. His instinct screamed that it was dangerous, that it could go very wrong. But his conscience said something different. He extended his hand. So, we're in this together. Ortega shook his hand. And at that moment, Miguel realized that the fight was just beginning. The partnership. Between Miguel and Lieutenant Ortega, it wasn't easy. In the following days, Miguel received anonymous calls with veiled threats. Messages telling him to stop digging, that nobody cared about that. His car was vandalized early one morning, but he didn't back down. Each attempt at intimidation only made him more determined. Ortega, in turn, faced resistance within the corporation itself. Previously friendly colleagues, they began to avoid her. Some superiors insinuated that she was playing against her own team, but she also did not retreat. Together, they spent weeks collecting testimonials, analyzing statistics, and crossing data. They discovered that Mendez was not an isolated case, had a whole group of police officers known for selective stops. They were the same names that appeared in several complaints filed without investigation. Or material was explosive. And on a Friday night, Miguel published your most important report. The Badge Mafia, How Structural Racism Protects Corrupt Cops in Monterrey. The impact was instantaneous. The article went viral. Public pressure was intense. Activist groups organized protests. Television channels began to investigate. The government was forced to act. The following week, the police chief called a press conference, announced that Mendez and 3 other police officers would be exonerated and prosecuted. He promised a complete reassessment of police approaches and the creation of an independent commission to oversee the department. It was more than Miguel expected. That night, he received a message from Ortega. We achieved. He stared at his cell phone for a few seconds before responding. Not yet, but we're on the way. The system was still flawed. Racism still existed. Corruption was still breathing. But for the first time, Miguel felt that he had struck a real blow against her. And I knew that this fight, it was just beginning. 2 months later, Monterrey was not the same. The streets were full of debates. The protests continued. The police were under constant surveillance. Some officers had been dismissed. Others were trying to adapt to the new reality. But the complicit silence that previously protected the corrupt had been broken. In the editorial of the diary, Miguel reviewed the reports that continued to arrive. Reports had tripled. People who were afraid, before now they spoke. There was a lot to do. Mendez's name was still on trial. Other officers had been denounced. The inspection commission was still in its infancy. The system tried to reform itself, but resisted. It was then that his phone vibrated. It was Ortega. "Do you have time for a coffee?" she asked. Miguel looked out the window. The sky was cloudy, but there was light. Always. He left the newspaper and walked to the coffee shop where it all started. This time, he didn't feel watched. Ortega was already there, with her hair tied up in her usual impeccable bun. But his face was lighter, less strain on the eyes. "And now?" he asked, after a sip of coffee. She gave a half smile. "Now you keep writing, I keep investigating. And the system?" Miguel raised an eyebrow. Ortega sighed. "The system struggles to survive. But now he knows we are watching." They clinked cups. Two opposing sides, now allies. Change did not happen overnight. But for the first time, they had made the city see, and that was a start.